This What's Left America. I'm Chris Tritico.
I'm James Campbell.
And I'm Chris Bell.
Andy is not here again.
She has been read out of this podcast this week.
Did y'all miss me last week, Chris?
No.
You didn't?
No, we didn't.
It was a great show.
It was. It was one of our best. One of our best shows.
I thought so, too.
Yeah.
You always say that shit when I'm gone. What's up with that, man?
Well, I don't know. Listen to the interview we did with, and you'll find out. With Rod
We
Hicks.
start calling you the weatherman. It's always windy.
What's Left America is produced by Left Out Media and brought to you by the generosity of our sponsors and friends like the Houston Federation of Teachers, Local 2415, AFL-CIO, and Stoli Vodka, and hopefully someday friends like you. Today on the show, we're going to cover Obama to Trump. I can't say what I wrote. Obama to Trump, screw you. Kavanaugh, down your throat. And who's minding the president? We got a interview with a very special guest, Rod Hicks, with the Society of Professional Journalists. He's the first journalist on call. We're going to finish the show, of course, with Out of Left Field. Let's get right into the show with our first
That was very clever the way you said out of left field, but let's get right into the show.
That's right.
Man.
I'm witty like that.
You really...
It takes a long time.
But
To cultivate that. Go ahead.
Obama to Trump, screw you. Stepping back into politics for the first time since he left office, Barack Obama gave a speech at the University of Illinois Urbana last week, sharply critical of President Trump and the RNC. He's been quiet the whole time, following tradition that he wouldn't speak out, didn't want to step on the toes of President Trump, who followed him in office. But not following tradition, Donald Trump has beaten Barack Obama about the head and shoulders at every turn, blamed everything but the weather on Barack Obama. And Obama just finally took the gloves off, and he hit him right on the nose.
I agree with that. So you hit it on the head. Presidents have traditionally not got involved with new administrations. And, but Obama actually, when he started his presidency, kind of blamed everything on the previous Bush administration.
Well, that was correct.
Yeah, I get that. But my point is, if you will allow me to be windy and finish it,
here we go.
Is that Obama has basically is going to troll Trump like Trump trolled him before Trump became president, but he hit the nail on the head. Not only did he take the GOP and the president to task, he also took on the Democratic Party and kind of laid out what we need to do as Democrats and progressives and independents to basically get back the power that we need to make the kind of changes in government that will help people.
well, if you go back to the movie, and if you remember American President, and they finally tell him you've got to you can't just let one man have the microphone
the whole time,
or they define you.
Right.
And he had no choice. If Donald Trump is going to try to eradicate his entire legacy and everything that he did while he was in office, then at some point he was going to have to stand up. And of course, one of Barack Obama's greatest skills, as we all know, is communication. He's an incredible speaker, and he demonstrated that at John McCain's funeral, and he followed that up with a speech this week. And Trump better watch out.
Well, but isn't there a problem with Barack Obama being the spokesperson for the Democratic Party when he can't run for office again, and we need somebody else to step up?
No, I don't think so. Bill Clinton was always continued to do events and make speeches after he had left the White House, and was always one of the stars at every Democratic political convention. So I think you rely on former presidents to carry a large part of the message.
But I don't think he's out there alone. You see that John Kerry has reemerged on the stage. He was on Meet the Press this morning. And I think what you have to create, Chris, is a surround sound, because I don't think Obama was being hyperbolic when he said this midterm election will be one of the most important in history, because we have to get the people to the polls. And what he's
question.
talking about is mobilizing people on all fronts and coming together to do this. And he's basically saying, tactically, we don't have to fight the Republicans on their low level.
Right.
We need to take the high ground, but we need to get out and vote. And so he's talking to the right crowd. He's talking to millennials and disaffected voters who need to go to the polls.
And he's also, Barack Obama is a very smart, serious guy. And we didn't really have a chance to talk about the funeral. Maybe we talked about it a little bit last week. But anyone who watched John McCain's funeral and saw both George Bush and Barack Obama deliver eulogies had to cry a little bit, either inside or outwardly, realizing that there's a Republican and there's a Democrat, and love them or hate them, they still were presidential, and they were statesmen, and they were statesman-like throughout their presidencies and afterward. And to now have this carnival act is really disheartening. And so I go back to the point that I don't think serious people really have a choice in this day and age but to start standing up and speaking out.
Well, and I think you're right that it was time for Barack Obama to start defending himself, and he tried to be presidential about this and let Trump have his time. But if he's going to attack everything he did and eradicate everything he did, he's got to start standing up. And the Democratic Party needs him to come out and coalesce the party around something. And I think it's the right time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he did when he began his speech is he basically implored us to figure out who we are and what we stand for. And he also, I think, in talking to that white, disaffected worker class that the Republicans really kowtow up to try to divide
who they're not helping.
Yeah, who exactly, to try to divide people along cultural lines. He basically said, this is not a new game plan, and we know this is not a new game plan, and let's basically come together to try to change the equation here and figure out who we are as a people, and if this is the way we want to go.
And to ask the Republicans who they are as a party. And he points out things about what was said about him by the Republicans when he was president. One of the great examples was Russia. Anytime he reached out to them, they were highly critical of his actions. And now Donald Trump goes and disgraces us, and that's just fine.
I just want to see Maxine Waters at Trump's next State of the Union speech yell out, "You lie," like Joe Wilson did.
See what happens.
Yeah, and see what happens.
They'll drum her out of Congress if they can. All right, let's move on. Kavanaugh down your throat. If you watched the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings last week, it was amazing to watch this. When Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, the Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley said it would be the most transparent confirmation in history. I'm not sure where he gets his definition of transparency, because that wasn't it. It certainly wasn't the case if you believe the Democrats. The Republican-controlled committee made thousands of pages of documents committee confidential, which happens in these hearings. But this was more, according to Democrats, more than ever before. And they turned over 47,000 pages of documents the night before the hearing. Grassley, in announcing the opening of the hearing, said it's no big deal. We looked at the pages last night. And one of the Democrats on the committee said, if you did that, it was 7,000 pages an hour. Your staff must be Superman. And off they went.
It's absolutely amazing watching these hearings. Brett Kavanaugh is a smart man. He basically helped nominees for court positions talk to the committees. And he basically is following his own game plan, which is to say nothing. But the thing that the American people should be concerned about is the outright lies and
the perjury
and the amnesia on things that he's talking about when there are emails that say that he was involved with and knew about the wireless, tapping and the wiretapping program that the Bush administration was involved with, as well as other, really nefarious things that were going on in the Bush administration.
The theft from the Democrats.
Can anybody define for me what it means to be read into a program?
No,
I had never heard that, and he used it repeatedly. I never quite figured out.
I think that just means they bring you up to speed. I think that is what that means.
Well, we're hearing terms like the truth is not the truth, and all kinds of variations on phrases now, Chris, that we've never heard before. To avoid telling the truth.
Here's my impression of those hearings, in that I know our program is What's Left America, and we have a left-leaning audience, and we're all supposed to talk about how great the Democrats did, but I'm just going to have to call it like I see it. I didn't get to see a lot of the hearings. I heard a lot of it. I thought it was all kind of pathetic on both sides. I think this has become a complete political theater.
Right.
And I think that Cory Booker, I don't know how many stars he's going to earn for that performance, because it was all seemed to be a show, trying to act like he was being so bold and brave and risking his Senate seat when they'd already said he could release those emails. He really wasn't risking anything by.
Well, they didn't say that till later, because if during the hearing,
they had told him.
Well, but then why did
Kamala Harris?
No, the senior senator from Texas. I can't even think of his
John
name.
Cornyn.
John Cornyn, while he was doing it, said you can get kicked out of the Senate for this, and so they didn't decide till later that they had released those, and so I'm not really sure who's telling the truth here.
Yeah, but I think.
But wait, hang on, let Chris finish his thought.
Well, no, it all just kind of bothers me, and that they don't have a whole lot to fight with here. I did think the one interesting article that came out of it was from, was her name Lisa Graves, who was able to
said I wrote those things.
Write quite a strong article that says he thinks she thinks he should be impeached for lying in his previous hearings and acting like he didn't know those materials were stolen that he got, or said, I guess before he said he never had seen them.
He never said. Lisa Graves said he should be impeached from his 2004-2006 hearings when he said he didn't know anything about him, and she said I wrote them. He knew about him. He saw him, and he lied.
Yeah. So Dick Durbin said this. He said, you say that words matter, in talking to Kavanaugh. He says, you claim to be a textualist when you interpret other people's words, but you don't want to be held accountable for the plain meaning of your own words. And whenever he's asked a question, he basically lawyers up. And that's what we've gotten in this hearing, is him basically denying his own words and or either lawyering up on it.
Well, he admitted to some stuff, and he appears to be a really good kids coach.
Oh, yeah, he's a very good basketball coach.
Yeah, he is.
And they acknowledge
this
that.
is something that has started ever since Robert Bork was denied his seat over the marijuana, I guess is what his was. I can't remember now.
No.
And
it was just his overall
crappy demeanor,
in Watergate, everything else.
But
marijuana was the next guy.
Oh, that's right. But ever since then, the plan has been you don't answer questions,
right?
And both the Democrats and the Republicans have allowed this to happen, and so now it's to the point where if you don't answer any questions, you get confirmed. And so and I think Chris Bell is correct. Is that both sides are to blame for this, because we've allowed this to take these confirmation hearings to get to this point. But the highly politicized nature of this is what has the Democrats so mad. And the fact that the Republicans wouldn't give them any of the documents from the Bush administration, it will cause a cloud over this for a very long time. When those documents finally become available, if there's something in there that'll cause him to be impeached, if the Democrats have control of the Senate, there's going to be hearings over that.
But I agree with that. But I think what's even more farcical about these hearings is that the fact that they didn't even give Merrick Garland, a very good jurist, an opportunity to even have a hearing.
Well, that payback will come someday.
Of course it will.
And the Democrats aren't going to forget about that. I think it's a shame that happened, but that payback will come someday. But when Kavanaugh is sitting on the Supreme Court, which he's going to be confirmed, when he's sitting on the Supreme Court one day, when those documents come out, if there's something in there that affects his credibility, if the Democrats can do anything about it, they're going to impeach him.
Yeah.
And that's going to send the country down another tailspin it doesn't need to go down.
Well, just from a policy perspective, and I'm going back to the midterm elections and why this matter and why Obama implored people to get out to the polls. Elections matter because you have a guy that's about to be confirmed to the court who has an ideological agenda that can fundamentally change this country for generations. This guy is young. He's going to be on the court for a very long time.
No, and I don't think that's lost on anybody, but the votes aren't there, and everyone kind of knows that, and you're giving people a little bit of false hope to suggest that if you just cause enough rancor and if you sign enough petitions and you place enough phone calls that it's suddenly and magically going to change.
No. I get that, Chris, but why it matters is because Ruth Bader Ginsburg she's up in age, and these Democratic jurors are gonna retire at some point.
Right.
And if you have control of the Congress and the presidency, then you get to decide who becomes a part of that equation on the Dem side on the local side.
I'm scared as hell, and it also scares me the fact that I thought Cory Booker did do a really good job of pointing out, and probably others did as well, that Kavanaugh was not even on any of the Trump short lists before this investigation started. And Kavanaugh is one who had made his views pretty clear that about sitting presidents not being able to indict sitting presidents.
The problem with both Cory Booker and Kamala Harris is it's obvious they're not trial lawyers because he said, I won't answer questions about hypotheticals. And Cory Booker has this pile of documents that things he's written before. So don't ask him a hypothetical. Here's what you wrote. Tell me about that. Here's what I'm asking you about. I want to know about this here.
Kamala Harris was a litigator. And
she didn't ask the question right.
Well, but she didn't know the answer to the question. And apparently I don't know if she'd gotten some bad information, but she certainly couldn't back it up. I did think one of Cory Booker's exercises was sort of interesting, where he talked to him about what he had said about George Bush and respecting his character, and asked him if he would say the same thing
a good question.
regarding Donald Trump. And I really didn't know where he was going at first, but then
he boxed him into
thought
a corner.
He kind of tied it together.
If
you think about it, if you read Richard Ben Cramer's book, What It Takes, about the 1988 presidential election, you see that a big part of Joe Biden's presidential strategy or campaign strategy that year centered around his position as the chair of the Judiciary Committee and one of the confirmation hearings, and I can't remember who that was for. I don't know if that was the Bork hearing or not, but a big part of the strategy to kind of lift him up and put him in a position to win was based around those hearings. So this has been going on for a long time, and I don't know if that's really the way we should be using confirmation hearings, and clearly that was back in play last week.
All right, let's move on. Our next topic is who's minding the president, and before we get too deep into the topic, let me try that again. Before we get too deep into the topic, I want to introduce our guest, Rod Hicks, who's with the Society of Professional Journalists, and he's been named veteran. He's a named veteran journalist, and he's the first journalist on call with the Society of Professional Journalists. A native of Birmingham, Alabama. He's been a journalist for years. He's won awards all over. Rod, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris.
Hey, tell us about this new role that you've taken on as the first journalist on call. Tell us what that means.
Well, my role is to talk to people about the role of the news media. The level of trust in the news media is pretty low right now. That's been the case for a while, but it's low right now, and so one of the things that I'm doing is talking to people about why they mistrust the news. And the other thing I'm doing is talking to news organizations, telling them this is why people don't trust what you're doing. Another part of the role also is to educate the public about why the role of the press is important, why it was in the Constitution, and and what the watchdog role of the press is. That is to keep a watch on the spending of your tax dollars and the activities of the people who you elect to keep you secure and to make decisions on how to spend your tax dollars.
It's a really important role that the society has created for you in this day and age with the media under attack by the administration.
That is true. Yes, we have a president who calls the media the enemy of the people, which is not true. The press is there to keep a watch on the activities of the administration and all the other functions of government, and to keep the public informed about what's going on.
But his attacks are obviously having an impact, are they not, Rod?
I'm sorry, what's the
president's attacks are obviously having an impact, or the Society for Professional Journalists wouldn't be taking this step, would they?
I don't know how related this position is with the rhetoric of the president. I don't know that. What I do know is that it is a very important role because people don't have a good understanding of why journalists are here, what they do, and why it's important to the democracy. So even if you take the president out of it, this is an important thing for the society to do and for citizens of this democracy to understand.
Rod, you've been here before. You, like me, I was the ombudsman at the Houston Chronicle, and you were.
I remember that.
And you once were an ombudsman where daily you would get calls or emails or letters from people complaining about stories being either too liberal or either too conservative, and you would have to explain both inside and outside the paper why people felt that way. I know that this is a difficult time because we have an administration who's basically taken the media to task, and it's making the credibility and the trust in media deteriorate even more. But this is not a new thing, Rod. You know that. And, when you have pieces like were published in the New York Times by an anonymous senior staff member, how do you talk to people about that and why, for instance, having somebody write something anonymously in this period might be an aberration but necessary?
Well, first of all, what the news media needs to do is there are things that the news media can do to bring back trust or restore trust in what they're doing. And things like the op-ed that you just mentioned really don't help. Because what we have, one of the things that is important, and every journalist knows this, every news organization knows this, is that one of your, if not the primary asset that you have, is your credibility. And what you try to do is mitigate any erosion of that credibility. One of the ways that you do that is through your sources. When you say that, when you attribute information to a source, the public, the readers, the viewers, the listeners need to be able to evaluate the credibility of that source. If that source is anonymous, you take that away. And in this environment, it feeds into what the president has been saying. He says that the New York Times makes up sources. I don't believe that. But if you are not that familiar with the New York Times, or if you just have a little weary about the press in general, that could actually ring true to you. So that's one of the things that you have to be really careful about. And I'm not saying that the New York Times shouldn't have done this because they had some things that they had to weigh it against, the public's interest in this,
Rod, let me ask you this. How much do you think the media's big splash mentality has contributed to this and created this situation? And what I mean by that, if you go back and read like really old newspapers, you'll see frankly rather boring reporting, but it's very straightforward, and it's just kind of the old dragnet, just the facts, ma'am approach. And obviously, as things have evolved, I think with both TV, radio, and print, there is sort of this effort, a constant effort to make a big splash. And I guess with that mentality and with the kind of competition you see in the media that day, how much of that lends itself to creating these types of situations?
I think I think that has a lot to do with it, and you need to also throw in social media, and you also need to throw in the proliferation of channels on cable. I think I have about 600 channels to choose for on my TV. All of this, much of the content is entertainment, but more important than that is a lot of it. There's a lot of information coming from a lot of different sources. So that's really who news organizations are, media, just like these other media. And how do you stand out? How do you get people's attention? So I think that is a factor if you look at how things have changed. Because I remember not that long ago in newsrooms, we were debating whether writing about Britney Spears was really news, those of us on the news side.
I'm still wondering.
But now,
well, thank God y'all decided it was.
It's like people are interested in it. That's
Let me
that's
ask
what
you
we
this.
do. We write what people are interested in. That's one of the things that we write that people are interested in.
Let me ask you this. If this anonymous op-ed had to come to the New York Times when Obama was in the White House, something this caustic about Obama had to come to the Times when Obama was in the White House, would they have run it, or did they just run this because of the caustic relationship between Trump and the Times?
I can't really tell you what the Times would have done.
Well, you get my point, though. You get my point, though.
I do get your point, but I really don't know, because there is something very different here. Something very different that we have not seen, and that is the type of administration that we have right now. What has been reported in Bob Woodward's book, and what this anonymous op-ed writer is saying, is consistent with what reporting of reliable news organizations have been reporting since the president took office. So the times that we are in now, the potential for some of the decisions of this president makes this, I think, a bit more serious. So I don't know if I don't even know if there's anything that you could equate to this type of piece that could come from an Obama White House. So it's quite different, and
Rod,
I don't know.
I would agree with you, but one of the things I'd like to get you to talk about is media has changed by and large, and unlike when you and I started out in the business, everybody has a bullhorn now called Twitter, mm-hmm. where you can talk directly to your constituents or your readers or your viewers or your followers, and basically thinking people have to filter that, what you say directly to them, through what the New York Times or any other newspaper, CNN, Fox News says to viewers or readers. So how do you, in this atmosphere, talk to people about the credibility of the media? Because all of us in this room, Chris Tritico, even though he's an attorney, he does,
You don't have to say it that way.
Does stuff on television, and he tries to be credible in the information that he provides to the viewers. And Chris Bell was also a journalist. So
And a politician.
And a politician. No,
and a lawyer.
The trifecta. The trifecta.
And so how do you navigate this water, man? It's a difficult time to be out there trying to tell people, trust me, because, I have ethics.
James, I was talking this week to a guy who lives in Maryland, and he has pretty well educated. He has a master's degree, and he's a reader, and he is an astute follower of what's going on in his community. And he has some stature in the community. And he said to me that it is difficult for him to know what he can and cannot trust in throughout all of the media that he gets exposed to every day. And so one of the things that he has done is that he's going to sources outside of the United States to see how other news organizations are covering the United States, what they consider important that's going on over here, and how they report it.
That's interesting.
It is very difficult to navigate this when the things that we mentioned, all of the competition for your attention, and that competition is not even limited to the things that we mentioned. It's also limited to your children who want your attention, your spouse or your partner who wants your attention, the going to play golf. There's so many things that are crying for your attention. And when you look at the media landscape, you just don't know what to believe. Now, one of the things that we're trying to get developed is a news literacy project that will help you tell whether I can trust this organization versus that news organization. So those are some of the things that we want to try to do.
I can give you some help with that. Anything that starts with Breitbart.
Wait, what did you say?
Anything that starts with Breitbart is not credible.
Well,
you don't have.
We want to give people the tools to decide on their own what is credible and what's not. And let me just say this: it's more than what's credible and what's not credible. It is what is the perspective that you're coming from, because certain news organizations have certain political leanings, and they want you to hear things from their perspective. So we want people to be able to navigate through that and get a better understanding of what is the information they're receiving.
Rod, thanks a lot. Rod Hicks, Society Professional Journalist. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Rod, thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye-bye. With Bob Woodward's book coming out and then this anonymous op-ed coming out at the same time, that's really nothing new, these two things. It's reporting that's been happening for a long time, but it certainly turned Washington up on its heels, that's for sure. And Woodward's book and the op-ed has the president in a tizzy. Where does this go? What happens now?
One reason I asked Rod the question about big splash journalism, I think this plays right into it, in that I really don't think it's a coincidence that this anonymous editorial appeared the same week that the Washington Post was publishing excerpts of Bob Woodward's book. Bob Woodward has never published a book where excerpts have not been previewed in the Washington Post where he works. So it was not going to come as a big surprise to anyone that that was going to happen. And then that very same week, when they're obviously getting a lot of attention for Woodward's book, suddenly you have this anonymous editorial, and that seems to be saying almost exactly the same thing about the lack of stability. And I find that to be a little bit problematic, and other people have pointed it out this week that your focus now, especially with the anonymous editorial, on who said it or who was this, and this big mystery, and not on what he said,
not on the content.
And a lot of the sources, or all of the sources in Woodward's book, are anonymous as well, and people really haven't. Well, not all of them. That's not correct. But a lot of the more controversial things are not attributed, and so I guess part of the problem is everyone's trying to figure out who said it and not what did they say. And if you read what they said, that we really should be talking about some of that.
I got two things about that. First, absolutely, the White House needs to stop and consider the fact that there's too many reports that the White House is dysfunctional and the president is dysfunctional, and somebody needs to stop and analyze that. But with respect to this anonymous op-ed, The person who wrote this says that they're in the resistance and that they're doing this secretively to protect the country. Well, I just got to call BS on that, because if you're doing this to protect the country, you don't write an op-ed and take your shadow movement into the public, because then you just destroyed your shadow movement. And so what that person did was, by writing this op-ed, is not protect the country. He didn't protect me. He didn't protect you. He didn't protect anybody. He protected himself. And he just did what he did, or I don't know if it's he or she, but did what he did to try to get a book deal down the line. That's all he did. And I don't have any respect for that. And if you really want to protect the country, then come out of the shadows and say, this president is this, and this, and let's do something about it.
Okay, we could argue tactically whether that was the right thing to do from an ethics and a rationale point of view, but I think what you have, Chris, and everything has to be put in the context of what we are going through right now with this presidency and with this administration. And I think that if you really want to, know what's going on, you're going to have people whispering to you. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the USA Today have reports daily from people anonymously about what's going on in this White House. But let me just step back and talk about Bob Woodward's book. What we have is a book of the month about Trump. Every month, you had Michael Wolff, you had Omarosa, now you got Bob Woodward.
All saying the same thing.
And there's a story in the Chicago Tribune about there are more than a dozen books in the works that are going to come out about Trump. So you're going to have people whispering in the shadows about this. And although I disagree with you on whether or not this should have been published, this person, whoever this was so concerned about what's going on in terms of this president's decision-making ability. Look, you have presidents making decisions about whether to use the nuclear weapon, whether to make a critical military decision, whether to make an airstrike on a country.
We know that, James, but if that's the case, and if that's what he was trying to protect us against, why did he blow it all up?
Yeah.
Because basically, as Chris will point out, that's what he did.
But that person is still in the ranks.
But you can't operate a shadow government by publicizing it. Now everybody's watching.
Okay. Well, let's say that this person is not alone in being a part of the resistance in the White House. Trump doesn't know. If you got several people in that White House pushing back, he can't tell. He doesn't care.
But he's going to be watching much more closely.
Do you think Schindler?
He's one of the smartest people in the world. Just ask him.
Do you think Schindler put all those people away from the Nazis by writing an op-ed in the New York Times in the middle of it, or did he wait 70 years to have a book written about it?
No,
that's a bad
analogy.
It is not a bad analogy.
He was part of the resistance.
Yeah, he was part of the resistance. He kept it quiet. He never told anybody.
But look, Chris, this guy is the president of the United States. We're 2 years in, and we've already had 6 books about this.
But how does that reassure anybody with somebody coming in and saying the president is crazy? We thought about getting rid of him.
We know that by his tweets, because it tells us, you have Democrats always talking about invoking the 25th amendment, the
25th Amendment.
25th Amendment, and talking about impeachment. Now we know that there are people within the White House who've been thinking about this. The vice president was questioned about that.
I understand. Here's my point. I think you missed my point. My point is, you're either going to operate in the shadow. Hang on. You're either going to operate in the shadows to protect the country.
The shadow's not going away, Chris.
Hang on. Let me finish. You're either going to operate in the shadows to protect the country, or you're going to come out publicly and say, this president is an effing nut and you have to stop him. So you can't have it both ways.
Okay, yeah, Trump is going to be watching, but look, do you think he's not watching right now?
He obviously didn't know about this because he's now going crazy trying to figure out who it was.
He's going crazy about Bob Woodward's book. He went crazy about Omarosa's book.
Am I wrong about this?
He went crazy about Michael Wolff's book. It's the same thing, Chris. Everybody knows that Trump is being watched by people with level heads inside the White House.
One of the funniest things, I heard it on the way over. I was listening to Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, and they said, writing this and saying that that Donald Trump is unstable is sort of like one of the elves writing in and saying that Santa Claus has a weight problem. and I thought it was hilarious. And there's some truth to that. I think what Chris is saying, though, if you're really a true resistance movement, then you don't publicize it. I don't have any problem with the ethics of the New York Times
Me either.
publishing an anonymous editorial. As a journalist, I always relied, and some of my best stories relied upon anonymous sources. People aren't going to risk their job and livelihood and tell you things if you don't protect their identity. And I get all that, and that's fine, and that's the way journalism works. So that's not the problem. But I do think Chris is completely correct that if you really wanted to keep this going, you don't expose it.
Okay, well, let me ask this one fundamental question. Do you think the resistance is going away now that this is out there?
I think that there's such a microscope on it now. They're not going to be able to do the things they claim they were doing.
I disagree with that, Chris.
We'll see.
I disagree with that. The resistance is not going to go away because this op-ed was published. And as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else came out and published something. They will continue to talk to the media, even though Trump is going crazy.
But that's not the resistance.
But look at how he responds.
He responds like that to everything.
No,
Chris.
well, right, but that's what's so frightening is because if you read what the individual wrote, he hits on so many different points: his amorality, his lack of understanding, his flip-flopping and changing his mind all over the place. So many things were pointed out in that op-ed, and instead of really trying to just maybe not pay attention to it and focus more attention on it by lashing out, of course that's what he immediately does, instead of looking at some of that and saying,
maybe I'm wrong.
I'm running a circus here.
Right.
Did you say that Trump is saying maybe I'm wrong?
No, I'm agreeing with Chris.
Right.
Maybe he should stop and say maybe I'm wrong. He won't. I agree. He won't.
He's not going to.
He doesn't have the ability. He doesn't have the mental capacity to do it. I'm with you on that. I get it. Okay. I'm not being altruistic about it.
We have to agree to disagree on this, because I don't think that just because this op-ed was published that the resistance is going to wane.
So let me ask you this.
It's not going to go away.
Do you not have a fundamental problem with unelected people directing the control of the government away from the elected president?
Okay.
Whether you agree with the president or not. No, answer my question.
Let me ask you a question with a question.
It doesn't work that way.
Okay. Have we been in this time before where we had somebody in the White House who we believe to be unstable making decisions about the country and our lives and global affairs? We've never been here, Chris. So you can't go by president because we've never been here. You have a different way of functioning now.
Unelected people do not get to direct the country.
But you didn't have to do that with Obama. They had it to a certain extent with Bush, but it was more obvious that he was being directed by smarter people. But you're talking about being in a situation right now where we've never been. And so to me, there's no precedent for this, Chris.
Well, if this is allowed to go on, it undermines the entire meaning of the United States Constitution.
Well, and Congress needs to step up and start asking questions.
Oh, give me a break, Chris. Now you're going to talk about Republicans in Congress stepping up all the time. They will talk about this man behind his back, and they'll even talk about him in public, and they'll absolutely vote everything he puts before them. So don't say anything about Congress, because that right there is BS, my friend.
You're getting emotional.
You know how black people get. Black people just lose it.
Let's go to out of left field before James starts throwing things. we better move into out of left field.
I got something about throwing something.
You go.
So one of our greatest sporting events just ended, and it's tainted. And I'm talking about the U.S. Open. Serena Williams lost to Naomi Osaka, who's a very young, up-and-coming tennis player whose victory in the U.S. Open will be tainted by an umpire who basically called 3 code violations on Serena Williams and said, took a game from her, essentially. And for those of you who aren't tennis followers, Serena was so angry and talked about the umpire was sexist in doing this. And to Serena, I will say, you cannot be serious, as John McEnroe said, because you displayed a decorum on the tennis court that I would say is an aberration for you. But the rules are the rules, Serena. And your outburst and what happened was because of your mannerism on the court. This is a gentleman's and a lady's sport, and the umpire did exactly the right thing. So unfortunately, you, in this instance, I have to disagree with you, and that's my out of left field.
I was online looking for something, and an ad popped up for about 5 books that will change your life. And one of the books was called, or is called, Emotional Intelligence. And just to share a little description or an excerpt from it, it says the rules for work are changing. We're being judged by a new yardstick, not just by how smart we are or by our training and expertise, but also by how well we handle ourselves and each other. This yardstick is increasingly applied in choosing who will be hired and who will not, who will be let go and who retain, who passed over and who promoted. And I got to thinking about that and thought, that's really something voters should think about. How people, not just how smart they are or some of the things that they're throwing out, but how well they handle themselves and how they handle other people. Because one of the secrets to succeeding in government is learning how to get along and work with others. And as we near November 8th and the midterm elections, I really do hope some voters will take that to heart. And that's my out of left field for this week.
Was the art of the deal on that list?
No. It won't change your life.
My out of left field this week is about a theme I talk about all the time on this show, integrity. And if you paid attention last week, Bob Woodward, Anonymous, and all those people talking about our White House and our government. If you watch the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, you know that our government is absolutely not operating with integrity. It's not operating with professionalism. And we've lost that in our country, and I'm tired of it. And so if you want to get integrity and professionalism back in our country, you need to do exactly what Chris Bell just said. You need to vote. And we need to hold accountable those that we prop up and put into office. And if they're not acting with integrity, with professionalism, if they're not acting at the way that we expect our leaders to act, we need to make sure they're only in there for one term. That's my out of left field. That's all the time we have this week. We'll see you next week. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and rate us on iTunes. But more importantly, we really need you to subscribe to What's Left America. We need you to tell 3 friends to subscribe to What's Left America, because that's what it's all about. So have subscription parties. That's what we want, is subscription parties for What's Left America. Much thanks to our in-studio producer, Keegan DeLeo. Have a great week.